Not exactly a carbon copy as far as the gags that are involved, because The Graduate wasn't a gagged picture, but it's real close.
Shortly after Girl Shy was released, Lloyd's first child, Gloria, was born.
When he came home, the whole place was just bedlam. You could hear his voice. He just loved to shout out, and we'd all come running, and his work was behind him.
Portrayed in the press as the ideal family, the Lloyds were envied by the rest of Hollywood. These home movies, however, were never seen in public. Even the Lloyd studio was a family concern. He'd long worked with his brother. His father was vice president. Now he brought in his uncle as controller of finance as the money rolled in. His comedies took on a more expensive look, better photographed, better staged than almost anyone's. And the action was always a reflection of the time, a chronicle of the roaring 20s. Harold plays a man so rich, he's already bought his second car of the day. There was no script on Lloyd films. The scenes were developed by gagmen, like Sam Taylor, who was also Lloyd's most talented director. The process of creating gags was arduous. A friend of Lloyd's once sat in on a discussion in the gag room.
And this went on for hours, a whole day, and maybe 2 minutes of screen time out of this whole day. It was like being in a morgue. No one laughed and no one carried on. And then he rejected this and accepted this. I said, when does this ever stop? How do you make a picture this way? And that's the way it went. It was no fun, except when you saw it on the screen. Then it was wonderful.
A local thug finds his gang singing hymns in a mission and sets out to beat up the man responsible. Harold has seen the light, even if he sees little else.
Spent many hours, much like Stan Laurel did, in the editing room. He certainly was a guy that knew that if he didn't have something the first time, that he had enough time to go back and get it, that he had pictures that were budgeted high enough to spend money on previewing, and I think that he was a consummate filmmaker.
As a contrast to his films of city life, Lloyd set out to make a rural idyll, in the style of his great success, Grandma's Boy. It's love at first sight. To take the scene into another dimension, Lloyd had his cameraman, Walter Lundin, mount the camera on a special elevator. The climax was a vicious fight in the hold of a ship. The kid brother proves himself, as in Grandma's Boy, but Lloyd played it with a ruthlessness he'd never shown before. This quality was apparent in the way he drove himself in everything he did.
He's a very heavy competitor. We could never play games if he didn't win. And he would call you on the phone if you beat him in a squash game. Matter of fact, he sent me telegrams when I was at Berkeley, at the university, because I beat him over Christmas vacation in a squash game. And so he was going to persist. I was going to have to come down there and play him till he won.
He hated losing. Ooh. He wanted to be the winner. Even in a game of canasta, he had to win. And a lot of people that played with him didn't want to play with him because they just, they wanted their chance too. So, but that was one thing that I didn't like about his attitude, was the winning.
Lloyd had been winning throughout the 20s. His pictures earned colossal sums, and he sank more and more into them. For Speedy, he embarked on rebuilding New York City on his backlot. Determined to build the biggest and most impressive home in Hollywood, he'd already invested his rocketing income in Beverly Hills real estate. His success seemed unstoppable.
The promotion on Speedy, it was like it was announcing the second coming. I mean, it was so hysterical. And now, of course, this was Paramount, putting a heavy budget back into it. But it was worth it for them, always. And Lloyd always did make more money, certainly than Keaton, and more than Chaplin, if you put it on a, per year basis.
By 1928, Lloyd had made 11 comedy features against Chaplin's 3. He was in his mid-30s, a glittering future before him, yet Speedy was nostalgic for the old ways. The last horse car in New York is under threat from a big corporation. Harold has to help his girlfriend's grandfather keep it running, at least once every 24 hours. Not content with rebuilding New York and California, Lloyd took his company to Manhattan for the main exteriors. The city was thrown open to him for a sequence intended to top even the chase in Girl Shy. Gangsters have stolen the streetcar. Harold must get it back before the time limit runs out. No filmmaker had made such flamboyant use of New York City. But location shooting had its perils.
But what happened is they were shooting in sequence, as they did when they made a lot of those films. And once everyone saw this crash, and that the driver had been shaken up but not killed, and that the horses seemed to be all right, and they had this spectacular piece of film, Harold said, "This is great, I've got to use this. And what we'll do is we'll set a camera up, I'll get off stage, you pull me, and I'll land and roll." Everyone got together and they actually rewrote for that bit right on the spot.
The deadline is almost up. The gangsters, in a last desperate attempt, set a trap for the horse car. Harold is a local hero, champion of the old traditions. But the old tradition in the movies had already been shattered. The greatest threat to the style which Lloyd had perfected. He decided to meet the challenge head on.
I beg your pardon, sir.
Oh, that's perfectly all right. Isn't that a remarkable specimen of the dianthus coreopsis?
A silent gag with sound. Lloyd had almost completed Welcome Danger as a silent when he passed a theatre and heard